There's a number of factors going on. So first we've got the stock market, huge decline. And then on the AI side of the stock market, particularly semiconductors and AI related companies, that's been going in the other direction. So you've got a general shift of investment money from the enterprise software segment into advanced technologies, particularly semiconductor. The existential moment is either risk or opportunity, depending on how you look at this. And I think why it's an existential risk for certain companies, and I'll talk about HTEC, is it's a DNA issue. It's not that these companies aren't filled with very, very experienced people, but they've got a 20-year DNA that's very, very difficult to change. And then you've got the marketplace starting to change valuation perspectives, and it's really about how you react. The average person can increase their productivity by X%. The really skilled and the curious, it's exponential. The reasons I think speed is so important is that people that adopt these types of technologies can see the ability to go from zero to hero really, really fast.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Rumble. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer and AI Ambassador here at HTEC. Now today I've got a really exciting session. I'm joined by our Chief Strategy Officer, Lawrence Whittle. Lawrence, thank you for joining us today. And we're going to talk about one of the most important questions facing global enterprises right now. What does the future of enterprise software look like in an alternative world? And we're going to explore some assumptions. So assumptions around SaaS, for example, and legacy enterprise applications that are being challenged in the way that they operate at the moment. How AI is reshaping the software development cycle. And why speed to market actually isn't what's driving success anymore, but judgment, governance, and engineering DNA matter more. And I want to talk a little bit also about your perspective on why HTEC is well positioned in that particular space. So you have recently written a blog on this topic, so I'm going to go straight in there with the headline that you gave us at the time, which is, you've described 2026 as an existential moment for enterprise software. So let's start there. What's driving this shift and why now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is not sort of late breaking news. I think throughout 2025, as I go around the world talking to clients and prospects and investors, I was frequently getting asked my opinion on the enterprise software world. And when I sort of double clicked on the question, it was related to the news and particularly related to the stock market. So if you look at the last 15 to 20 years, the growth of enterprise software, especially SaaS, has been substantial. But then if you look at the last couple of years, the stock valuations of SaaS companies has come down and down and down, plus or minus 50% in the last 24 months. So it's not like it's late breaking news. It's actually been a downward trend. And then you've heard these things such as SaaSmageddon, which is a very difficult word to actually say, but what people are saying is it's the end of the SaaS market as we know it. There's a number of factors going on. So first we've got the stock market, huge decline. And then on the AI side of the stock market, particularly semiconductors and AI related companies, that's been going in the other direction. So you've got a general shift of investment money from the enterprise software segment into advanced technologies, particularly semiconductor, that's driving the AI revolution. So when I talk about existential risk and existential opportunity, I think it's predominantly how you react to what's going on in the marketplace. So the last couple of decades, enterprise software has had a very sophisticated but somewhat traditional business model where they identify requirements, they talk to clients, they look at the market, they decide to build a product with a market requirements, product requirements, ultimately deliver a product. That cycle has just totally been thrown up in the air by AI. So the existential moment is either risk or opportunity, depending on how you look at this. And I think why it's an existential risk for certain companies, and I'll talk about HTEC, is it's a DNA issue. It's not that these companies aren't filled with very, very experienced people, but they've got a 20-year DNA that's very, very difficult to change. And then you've got the marketplace starting to change valuation perspectives, and it's really about how you react. So the existential moment is, it's clear that AI is now prime time. It's been coming for the last few years. It's now table stakes. I had the pleasure of being at the first ever partner event for an unknown company called Anthropic. When I say unknown, no one had heard of Anthropic until the last year or two. You look at their growth, it went from 100 million to 1 billion to 15 billion in about a year. That has never occurred ever in the life of Silicon Valley. So you've got this existential concern, But it really is a DNA issue, and it's how people react and how people think about how do they build solutions. And you sort of talked a little bit about, HTEC. The positive news is that we never got into the standard software business, not because it was a strategic decision, but because we saw a significant opportunity in the marketplace to build very specific IP where there was gaps in the market. So it's not like, do I do SaaS or do I go with HTEC? It's more about there isn't a standard solution, or I'm a company that wanted to develop some software that was part of the business. Therefore, it was clear IP. So because we've been in that market for a decade, our DNA was never this, let's build a standard solution, let's put loads of functionality into it, let's sell it on a subscription basis. You roll through to 2026, the world wants very, very rapid, highly configured and highly customized solutions around AI. And this is why our DNA fits it very well. The enterprise market has the opportunity to survive and prosper, but they need to get their skates on because the market is moving very, very fast. And it's not that people are going away from enterprise software. It's sort of been relegated to plumbing, and all of the value is seen on top of these workflows. And that's where I think the existential opportunity or risk exists.
So we're talking more of a reset for those companies. If you're a CEO of an organization and you're faced with that and somebody says, look, you need to press the reset button, there's clearly implication both from a operation model and things like that. If the question is, where do I start with that? What would you recommend to those individuals?
Yeah, so I think it depends on your marketplace, your view on internal versus external. And when I talk about the marketplace, how regulated you are. So different companies have different compliance levels. Again, giving a little bit of history, a couple of years ago when people started to use the term AI, and then around March last year, it became agentic AI. And then you've got OpenAI, and then you've got Anthropic. All of this happened somewhat organically. This wasn't like there was a massive marketing campaign, like no software from Salesforce. This just happened organically. And so people started to use it in their personal life. And then people started to use it case by case in organizations. And then CIOs woke up and said, oh my God, I need to have some level of control. So what we always say is try to figure out where is the maximum ROI, but make sure you have a balance of not constraining people, but not letting it go crazy. Because there are regulatory issues, there are compliance issues, but there's also massive value if you can find the right use cases. So really look at ROI and then just make sure you've got some sort of compliance wrapper around the ROI. If there's ROI, go for it, but make sure that you think about the implications of driving that particular use case.
And in terms of, you've talked about the delivery model and changing that delivery model in the AI area, and you've talked about HTEC being well placed. What is it that makes us different? In that way of working?
Yeah, so if you think about, again, I'll use Anthropic. I could use any tool out there, but I'll just use Anthropic, for example, Claude. If you give a tool to a fool, don't expect much. If you look at the use cases that are being developed by HTEC and by the more advanced users, it's because the DNA of those people is heavily skewed towards expertise. So if you think about the spectrum of software engineering, at one end you've got sort of commodity engineering, and at the other end you've got very advanced engineering, which is now sort of interchangeable to some extent with AI. Because we always focused on a heavy skew towards hiring the best talent, retaining them, and working on the more complex use cases, the curiosity that our people have and the expertise, put them with an AI tool, it becomes exponential. So I think this is one of the interesting situations. AI can be for everyone, but the more curious you are, the more skilled you are, which is heavily part of our DNA. We used to say, give us your most complex problems to start with.
Yes.
That was our sort of mantra. Therefore, because we have that experienced talent that's super skilled and curious, our ability to actually pick up and drive these use cases really fast. It's not that other people can't, but you can see when you analyze the results and the outcome of people that use these AI development environments, the more skilled engineers, it becomes exponential. Yeah. So the average person can increase their productivity by X%, the really skilled and the curious, it's exponential.
So we're talking about skills, and clearly those enterprises who are having to change the operating model and really press that reset button, they're not going to have the skills overnight.
Correct.
So there's they need to take a different look at partnerships and who they're partnering. What are you seeing in the marketplace in terms of people's openness to partners? So if I think about the survey that we did recently, we did a survey, 2,500 executives, and interestingly, there was a bit of a contradiction. They claimed that they were at 60%, I think roughly, completely aware that they needed to partner with external people in order to boost that talent and accelerate that whole journey. At the same time, they felt that they had the right level of talent internally. So it points to a level of contradiction within the organization. But what are you seeing, and what would be, for somebody looking to partner, what are some of those key criteria?
Yeah, it's a great question. I also think this is a fast-moving situation. So I think if you'd surveyed people 18 months ago, 12 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, you'll get slightly different questions based on the maturity of organizations. Again, a little bit of history of the last 2 years, the frenzy that started in sort of 2024, 2025, then agentic came along, and then sometime during the summer, everyone was saying, no, this stuff doesn't work. It's overcooked and it's not. And then I think what's happened in Q4 and in early part of this year is that a lot of that early sort of trialing and erroring did help a lot of organizations to understand where is the value and where is just the basic. So there's utility in all AI, but where is the real value? There was also a lot of noise in 2025 early that AI is all about, I've got 10 people, deploy AI, I only need 5. Actually, that's totally flipped, where people are now saying, I've got 10 people, how do I make that 10 people as efficient as 20 people? So it's also changed the narrative. So I think I'm going to reduce headcount has now gone away. It's how do I make my headcount more efficient? What I've seen extensively in the last few months, maybe in as short as the last 2 or 3 months, is I don't go to any executive meeting now without them already saying I've got a hypothesis of where the use cases are. And that hypothesis list is very, very, very long.
Right.
And when you look at the competency that most companies have versus the list, it's totally misaligned. And my friends Anthropic said something last week at this event where they've now estimated that there is an 8 to 12 times requirement for services to really deploy this at scale. So every dollar needs $8 to $12 of services. And there is not enough expertise in the world. This is way, way bigger than SAP. The difference from the SAP days of services is that they were multi-year projects.
Yes.
Whereas now that people want it like next week, next month, worst case next quarter. So I think there is a recognition from the companies that have been on that sort of journey over the last couple of years. There was a euphoria, the hype, and then it went down. Then they start to see use case and they start to see value. Now they have this long list of value. They clearly need third-party partnerships to help realize that value at speed, because I think that's the key. They may have enough people if they've got enough time, but if you want to get this deployed fast, you need expertise and you need people that can deploy and supplement to get the velocity.
And that's an interesting comment, Lawrence, because that also ties in very neatly with one of the questions we had on the survey was actually, if you're not at a level of maturity, which is kind of a minimum at this stage, how long do you think it would take you to, get back to being competitive? And there was a lot of, depending on the industry, there were a lot of gaps, but, it was around 2 to 3 years for a lot of companies. And that is, listening to you, that's a lifetime in terms of what's happened. So I think speed is absolutely critical here. So in terms of CEOs, CIOs, and chief AI officers, what do they need to be doing today to not sort of, sit on rotting assets, for want of a better term?
Yeah. So the reasons I think speed is so important is that people that adopt these types of technologies can see the ability to go from zero to hero really, really fast. So if you just think about the technology space, let's go back to the enterprise software space where we start the conversation. 10 years ago, definitely 20 years ago, it would take several years for an early stage company to develop and deliver value from a new technology. You can literally do that at a 10th of the time now. So, your competition's coming in, but you've got a 3-year lead. So worst case, they're not going to catch up in 3 years. They can catch up really, really quickly. So I think the asset that is currently maturing will rot very, very quickly because competition can zoom past. And I think that's the issue. It's not anymore the recognition of the risk and the opportunity. It's actually calibrating. You've got to move fast. And I think that's where the DNA issue is, even for technology companies who have historically moved a lot faster than traditional businesses, but they've still thought about quarterly cycles, release cycles, roadmaps in multiple months, whereas modern generation is, what do I do today? This concept of the forward deploy engineer, which is sort of a descriptive that's come out, it's a combined product manager with a business consultant and a software engineer almost in one. You do that in a cycle of an hour or a day, as opposed to, let me come and do some research, let me come back with some requirements, let me send you those requirements. Okay, let's get those requirements signed off. I'll start coding and months later I'll deliver something. That cycle has just been crushed. And so I think that's where the issue is and the opportunity is. I don't think anyone's fighting the value anymore, but I think they're still not sure about how fast this thing can go.
So from a customer standpoint, we're talking about value, forward deployed engineers. Are they understanding that value? And what is, ultimately, if it's not about feature function, because they are so easily, delivered by AI in a completely different way and faster and more effectively. So it's much more the focus on what the value that it delivers. What's the value as part of that cycle of that forward deployed engineer?
Yeah, so I'll unpack value a little bit more because it's fascinating for me, having spent most of my career on value propositions and value-based positioning. Again, I've mentioned 3 times my friends at Anthropic, to have that sort of growth that they've had organically, intrinsically that's because of usage. Right. Okay, and most software that is successful is because it's used. Most software that isn't successful is because it's not used. Usage is a very, very big proxy for value. And I think that's what's interesting, that the organic bottoms-up usage intrinsically has delivered enough perception of value and probably value. I think the challenge for a lot of companies is figuring out what's the baseline. Mm-hmm. And so the quicker you can get started, you can then establish a baseline and then accelerate from it. So I think It's a very complex discussion. I think value that used to be talked about in the past, which is if I spend X amount over Y period, what's my return? It's very difficult to estimate that. So figure out how to get started, build a baseline, accelerate the value, and then you'll get evidence. And do that fast rather than a typical multi-month or even multi-year project.
So you're Chief Strategy Officer at HTEC. You've been with the company just over a year now. What excites you the most about your job at this particular moment, as in with everything and the speed that everything is moving? Yeah,
so I've been involved with HTEC. I was their second ever client when I was CEO of a software company in Silicon Valley. So I've sort of watched the journey over almost 10 years. So the reason I started working with HTEC well before the pandemic was because I saw the need for a very agile and premium mentality of engineer. 2026 and everything I've talked about, you need velocity, you need expertise, you need people that understand value realization. I'm almost writing the script of the DNA of HTEC, and therefore I believe that timing is the success for most companies, finding the right, talk about this product market fit. In a conceptual sense, I think we have such a good product market fit at HTEC. 2,500 plus or minus highly skilled engineers that have built the business around finding value, rapidly delivering high quality. This is so analogous to the way the market's going. And it's not about SaaS being dead or not being dead. It's about this DNA issue. And I think we've got such the DNA because of how we've developed over the last decade. Now the market is all in that direction. And the forward deploy engineer is really, it's sort of almost like a catch-all description. It doesn't mean the engineer is sitting on site next to. It's more about the mentality of fast identification of the requirements, validating the value, specifying and building very, very fast. It's that mentality rather than do I put 10 people on someone's site? And I think that's why it's so exciting for HTEC right now.
Okay. Lawrence, thank you very much for your insights and your candor. Really appreciated your time. It's clear that we're at a major turning point in terms of not just what software does, but how it's conceived, built, and delivered. And if you're at a turning point and you are looking to modernize your system, certainly get in touch. We'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.